They called me a murderer. And in the space of a single breath, the man I loved, the future I had built, and the very truth I stood for, all vanished. I was sentenced to life for a crime I did not commit, a sacrifice made for my husband. But the deepest betrayal wasn't his silence in the courtroom. It was the chillingly calm gaze of my own defense attorney, the woman who held my life in her hands while secretly holding his. My name is Eleanor Vance. Before inmate number 734, I was an art historian. My world was one of quiet galleries, the scent of aging canvas, and the meticulous search for truth hidden beneath layers of paint. I believed in evidence, in justice, and in the story that facts could tell. I never imagined that the greatest fiction I would ever encounter would be the one written about my own life, signed and sealed by the two people I trusted most in the world. The sound of a key turning in a lock became the punctuation of my existence. The cold, unforgiving light of the cell block replaced the soft glow of museum lamps. A constant, sterile reminder that even the truth can be locked away in darkness. They took my name, my clothes, my history, but they couldn't take the silence inside me, a silence that screamed with questions. How could love become a cage? How could justice be so blind? This isn't just a story about a crime. It's a story about a soul's journey through the deepest betrayal a human heart can endure. And the slow, painful discovery that the only way out isn't through a gate, but through forgiveness. The air in the courtroom was thin and heavy, thick with the smell of old paper, cheap perfume, and the anxious sweat of lives hanging in the balance. I remember focusing on a single spot on the polished wood in front of me, tracing the grain with my eyes as if there were lines on a map that could lead me away from there. Every sound was amplified. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the rustle of papers, the restrained cough of a spectator. I was an art historian. My life was dedicated to finding truth in quiet details, but there, in that room, the truth was a scream no one could hear. My husband, Richard, sat 2 rows behind me. I didn't need to turn to feel his silence, a deafening vacuum where his support should have been. He was the sun around which my world revolved, and now I was being swallowed by the shadow he cast. Beside me, Laura, my defense attorney, maintained a posture of professional calm. Her words to the jury were eloquent, but her eyes, when they met mine, were like polished glass, reflecting everything, revealing nothing. The action unfolded in torturous slow motion. The judge, an imposing figure robed in black, read the verdict with a voice that held neither malice nor compassion. It was simply the voice of the mechanism, the sound of a final gear clicking into place. Guilty. The word didn't boom. It was a crack, dry and final, like a bone snapping. A collective gasp rippled through the room, but I couldn't breathe. I turned my head slowly, a movement that took all my strength, and searched for Richard's eyes. He didn't meet them. His gaze was fixed on Laura, my defender, and it was there, in that millisecond of connection between them, a look of shared relief, of grim victory, that the true sentence was passed. It wasn't prison, it was betrayal. The judge's gavel fell, its sound echoing the snap of my breaking heart. And as the bailiffs approached, the world became a blur of shocked faces and camera flashes. They touched me, and the coldness of their hands was the first sensation of my new future. That moment turned me from a woman into a specter, a ghost haunting the ruins of my own life. The prison of steel and concrete that awaited me was just a physical manifestation of the cell Richard and Laura had built around me with lies. As they led me out, past the whispers and condemning stares, I finally understood the art of betrayal. It isn't an act of impulsive passion. It is a masterpiece of meticulous planning. It is a landscape painted with the colors of trust and intimacy, where every brushstroke of affection hides a layer of deceit until the final, shocking, monstrous image is revealed. What I saw in the mirror in the courthouse hallway was no longer me. It was the reflection of a fool, a sacrificial piece in a game I didn't even know I was playing. And the question that began to burn in my soul was not why, but how. How could love, the most creative force in the universe, be used to architect such a complete destruction? The intake process was a ceremony of dehumanization designed to erase who I was. They took my name, gave me a number. They took my clothes, gave me a scratchy blue uniform that smelled of bleach and countless past despairs. Every step echoed with a metallic finality in the concrete corridors. The sound of turning keys, of slamming bars. This was the new language, the soundtrack to my personal hell. The cell was smaller than I had imagined, a concrete box with a metal bunk and a steel toilet. The air was cold and heavy with the smell of disinfectant and something else, something sour and human. A single barred window showed not the sky, but another brick wall, a constant reminder that my world had shrunk to these four walls. The cold white light hummed incessantly, ensuring there was no complete darkness to hide in. It was the personification of the lack of privacy, a punishment within the punishment. When the iron door slammed shut, the sound finalized the abduction of my life. I stood in the middle of the cell for a time I cannot measure, feeling the hum of the building vibrate through the soles of my shoes. The silence of my cell was a lie. It was filled with the distant sounds of the prison, a muffled shout, a harsh laugh, the low restrained weeping of another woman somewhere nearby. They were the sounds of souls serving their sentences, not just in time, but in the constant presence of guilt. I sat on the hard edge of the bottom bunk, the metal frigid against my legs. I touched the thin mattress and the threadbare sheet, symbols of the new, brutal reality. Outside, night was falling, but in here, time didn't move. It crawled, heavy and suffocating. The woman in the top bunk neither moved nor spoke. She was just a shape under a blanket, her breathing a slow, steady rhythm in the dimness. It was a shared loneliness, the cruelest kind of all. That first night, sleep was a foreign country I could not visit. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look between Richard and Laura. I replayed it, dissected it, magnified it, searching for a flaw, an explanation that wasn't the monstrous truth. The initial shock, the denial that had sustained me through the trial, began to crumble, revealing the abyss of pain beneath. What truly imprisoned me were not the bars, but the past. The tears finally came, silent and hot, not for myself but for the woman I used to be. I wept for her naivete, for her unshakable faith in love and justice. She had died in that courtroom, and I was the ghost left behind. The true cell was guilt, not for the crime, but for having loved so blindly. The sound of my own trapped breaths became the echo of my mistake, and I knew, with a terrifying clarity, that my sentence had only just begun. The general population of the prison was a living organism with its own rules, its own language, at a hierarchy as rigid as any royal court. The yard during recreation hour was a battlefield of stares and postures. The women moved in constellations, groups formed by loyalty, fear, or convenience. There were the cell families, support networks that replaced real families, offering protection in exchange for obedience. The leaders, women hardened by time and violence, controlled the trade of commissary goods. Coffee, sugar, cigarettes, items that became currency in a world stripped of everything. I, with my education and my past in a world of quiet privilege, was an anomaly. A newbie who didn't know where to sit, literally and figuratively. My silence and my tendency to keep my head down were interpreted not as resignation, but as weakness, an invitation to danger. My cellmate, a woman named Maria serving life for armed robbery, was my first and harshest teacher. She was a lifer, and her eyes held the dark wisdom of one who had already lost all hope. "Stairs here are sharper than blades," she told me one night, her voice a hoarse whisper. Never show weakness. Respect here isn't asked for, it's earned with silence and a steady gaze. One day, in the mess hall, a large woman known as Mama Bear took the apple from my tray. The entire hall fell silent, waiting to see what the art professor would do. I remembered Maria's words. Instead of flinching or protesting, I looked directly into Mama Bear's eyes, a gaze without anger but unwavering. I held a stare for a long moment, then picked up my tray and walked away without a word. It was a small act, but in the prison code, it was a statement. I would not be a victim. That night, Maria gave me half of her bar of soap. You learn fast in here, she said. Either you learn, or you become a lesson for someone else. This small victory brought me no joy, only a profound weariness. I was learning to survive in a brutal ecosystem, but every lesson pushed me further from the woman I was. Anger was a shield, silence, a weapon. I was becoming one of them, my exterior hardening to protect an interior that felt increasingly fragmented. The worst part was the normalization. The sound of slamming doors became routine. The tasteless food became sustenance. The loss of privacy became the default condition of existence. But what I saw in the mirror that night, the reflection of a woman with cold, calculating eyes, was no longer me. It was a survivor, yes, but one whose spirit was being slowly eroded. The real prison wasn't the lack of freedom. It was the forced transformation of my soul. And I realized that to survive here, I would have to kill a part of myself every day. The question was, what would be left of me in the end? Weeks turned into months. The prison routine became a numbing anesthetic, each day a faded copy of the last. Then, the letter arrived. The envelope was expensive stock, the kind Richard used for his business correspondence. My heart, a muscle I thought had atrophied, gave a painful lurch. Jail mail was the only connection to the outside world, the only place where I could still breathe my own name. My hands trembled as I opened it. His handwriting, once so familiar and comforting, now looked like a stranger's. The letter was a masterpiece of manipulation, filled with poetic phrases about fate, sacrifice, and a future he promised we would still have. He didn't admit anything, nor did he deny it. He painted our disaster as an unavoidable tragedy, an act of a cruel universe, and me as a noble martyr in our love story. He said he loved me. He said he was fighting for me. He said Laura was doing everything she could. I read the letter again and again, sitting on my bunk as the chaos of the prison swirled around me. Every word was a sweet poison, feeding the small, foolish ember of hope I refused to extinguish. A part of me, the historian, the analyst, knew it was all a lie. It was a performance, an attempt to keep me quiet, to ensure his version of the story was the only one that survived. But the other part, the woman who had loved him for a decade, who had built a life with him, desperately wanted to believe. Hope is the only thing we have in here, and if you don't have hope, you don't have anything. Richard knew that. He was using my own survival need against me. Maria watched me from across the cell, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "What does the ghost want?" she asked, her voice cutting through my fog of confusion. I didn't answer, just folded the letter and put it under my pillow. That night, the letter burned beneath my head. Richard's words echoed in my mind, warring with the image of that look exchanged between him and Laura. It was the ultimate dilemma of guilt and redemption. How can you forgive someone who won't admit what they've done? I was being haunted not by a crime, but by the memory of love. He was asking me to keep the faith, but faith in what? In a man who watched me be condemned? In a lawyer who betrayed me? Hope, I realized, could be a tool for survival, but it could also be the cruelest of prisons. It was a cell within a cell, one that I was locking myself from the inside. In the darkness, I finally understood. Richard's letter was not a promise of freedom. It was a chain, designed to bind me to his narrative forever. And I had to choose. Either I clung to that chain and drowned, or I broke it and learned to swim alone in the dark waters of my new reality. The first anniversary of my sentence arrived without fanfare. There was no milestone, just the sudden realization that 365 days had been stolen from me. Time in prison has a different quality. It doesn't pass, it accumulates, like layers of dust on forgotten furniture. The daily routine, the sound of the doors, the count, the work and the laundry, the taste of the food had become the rhythm of my existence. The laundry room was hot and humid, the smell of soap and sweat permeating the air. I folded sheets and other inmates' uniforms, my hands moving in a mechanical rhythm while my mind wandered. Washing the floor was like trying to wash my soul, but the soap never removed the stain of what hurt. I was losing my connection to the outside world. Letters from friends and family became less frequent, their world, full of birthdays, holidays, and small joys, seemed increasingly alien, and my life, a cycle of punishment and boredom, was impossible to describe to them. The woman I was, Eleanor Vance, the art historian, was becoming a distant, almost mythical figure. I would try to recall the touch of silk, the smell of old books, the taste of a fine wine, but the memories were losing their color, their sensory detail. Prison doesn't just confine the body, it dulls the senses. My world was concrete, steel, disinfectant, and the sound of harsh voices. I would stand before the cracked mirror in the communal bathroom, a fragment that reflected a distorted version of myself, and try to find the woman I knew. But her eyes were becoming my eyes, harder, more wary. The arrogance I was building as a defense was becoming my identity. I moved with the learned confidence of a predator, not a victim. I would not walk small just because the world was afraid of a big woman. The turning point came during a group therapy session, something I had avoided but was forced to attend. The women spoke of their crimes, their regrets, their children lost to the system. One woman, sobbing, said, "What brought me here wasn't the crime. It was the scream that never came out." The sentence hit me like a physical blow. My silence, my refusal to speak of Richard and Laura wasn't strength. It was the scream I was swallowing. I realized the worst cell was the one I had built myself, furnished with wounded pride and Richard's lying letters. I wasn't just doing time. I was disappearing. I was allowing their betrayal to define me, to consume me. That night, for the first time in a year, I didn't think of Richard or Laura. I thought of me. If I couldn't have justice, maybe I could find something else. Maybe, just maybe, there could be redemption, not in the eyes of the law, but within the walls of my own soul. After the breakdown in group therapy, I felt a subtle but seismic shift within me. The anger was still there, a constant ember in the pit of my stomach, but it was now accompanied by a cold clarity. I couldn't change what they did, but I could refuse to let bitterness be the only thing that grew in the ruins of my life. With the help of Maria, who used her long-standing influence to pull the right strings, I managed a transfer from the laundry to the prison library. The library was a small sanctuary, a quiet, dusty room with shelves full of donated books, many with torn covers and yellowed pages. For most of the women, it was just a place to escape the noise of the yard. For me, it was like coming home. The smell of old paper and glue was the scent of my former life, a balm to my wounded soul. For the first time in years, I felt useful. My job was simple: catalog the books, repair the damaged ones, and help the inmates find something to read. It was there that I met Sarah, a 19-year-old serving time for drug possession. She was frightened, with eyes that seemed too big for her pale face. Every week, she would come in and check out the same children's picture book, flipping through it slowly before returning it. One day, my curiosity got the better of me. "You really like that story," I said gently. She blushed, a deep red creeping up her neck. "I can't read," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I just like looking at the colors. In that moment, something I thought was dead inside me, a sense of purpose stirred. I saw in Sarah not just a criminal, but a victim of the system, one of those who never had a chance. If you want, I offered, I can teach you. The lessons began in whispers, in the quiet corners of the library. Using the children's books, I started to teach Sarah the alphabet, the sounds, the magic of how letters joined together to form words. It was a slow, arduous process, but with each small victory, the first word she read on her own, her name that she wrote for the first time, I felt a joy that was purer and more real than anything I had experienced in years. Teaching Sarah to read became my ritual of resistance. It wasn't about justice or revenge. It was about creating something in a place designed only to destroy. It was my way of serving others, of finding a purpose in the midst of punishment. I was giving her a key to the world, and in doing so, I was, without realizing it, forging one for myself. Freedom was still a distant dream, but there, among the dusty shelves, I found a different kind of liberation. The freedom of knowing that even in a cell, my spirit did not have to be imprisoned. 6 years passed. 6 years of routine in the library, of secret lessons with other women who came after Sarah, of a fragile, hard-won peace. I had stopped waiting for news from the outside world. I had accepted that my former life was sealed, like a tomb. Then, on a gray Tuesday afternoon, my name was called over the intercom. "Vance, you have a visitor." My heart seized. I hadn't had a visitor in years. The walk to the visitation room was long, each step echoing the nervous beat of my pulse. And there she was, sitting behind the acrylic glass, looking older, more tired, but unmistakably her. My younger sister, Chloe. We weren't close. My intellectual life had always intimidated her, and her effervescent social life had always seemed frivolous to me. But she was blood. She was the last remnant of the family I had. The conversation was awkward, filled with the vast gulf of time and experience that separated us. She talked about our parents' health, about old friends, about the changes in our hometown. I listened, feeling like an anthropologist studying an exotic culture. Then, she hesitated, and I knew the real reason for her visit was about to be revealed. "Ellie, she began, using my childhood nickname, a soft knife in my heart. I saw Richard. I gripped the phone tighter. He and Laura they got married. A few years ago. The room seemed to tilt. The air grew thin. They have a son, Chloe continued, her voice full of a pity that burned me. A little boy. He looks like Richard. She described their life, the beautiful house. Laura's thriving career as a partner in a major law firm, the pictures in society magazines. They weren't just living. They were thriving on the ruins of my existence. After Chloe left, I walked back to my cell in a trance-like state. The pain was so intense, so physical, I could barely breathe. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. They hadn't just put me here. They had stolen my life and were living it as their own. All my defenses, all the peace I had built, crumbled. The image of a little boy with Richard's eyes became a torture, a constant reminder of the motherhood I was denied. That night, the anger I had suppressed for so long returned like a wildfire. I ripped up the one photograph I kept of Richard and me, tearing his smiling face to shreds. But in the midst of the fury, something new was born, a resolution as cold and hard as diamond. The hope for spiritual redemption was no longer enough. The pain transformed into fuel. They had made the mistake of believing I was broken forever. But now, I no longer wanted just to survive. I wanted justice. And I would wait as long as it took to get it. Chloe's news broke me in a way not even the jury's verdict had. The rage that followed was corrosive, a poison that isolated me from everyone around me. I became a ghost in the library, my interactions short and sharp. During a routine cell inspection, a guard found the torn remnants of Richard's photo. Deemed destructive contraband, it was the excuse they needed. I was sent to segregation, the punitive isolation the women called the hole. The solitary cell was the essence of deprivation, a bare concrete block, no window, no books, no human contact. Just a concrete slab for a bed and a light that never fully went out. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of my own blood pulsing in my ears and the clatter of the food tray being pushed through a slot in the door. It was a place designed to break the spirit, to force you to confront whatever was screaming inside your head. The first few days were torture. The anger, with nowhere to go, turned inward. I paced like a caged animal, the images of Richard, Laura, and their son playing on an endless loop in my mind. I screamed until my throat was raw, beat against the walls until my knuckles were bloody. I was at rock bottom, a place where hope could not breathe. But then, after days of fury, came exhaustion, a deep, hollow emptiness. Lying on the cold floor, I had nothing left. No anger, no hope, no past, no future. And it was there, in that absolute silence, that something happened. It wasn't a vision, it wasn't a voice. It was a feeling, a profound stillness that seemed to come from outside of me, enfolding me. For the first time, I wasn't fighting. I was just ... being. And in the stillness, I could finally hear myself. I could hear the pain beneath the anger. I could feel the girl I was, the woman who loved, and the prisoner I had become, not as fragmented parts, but as a whole. In the darkness of the whole, I found a kind of faith. It wasn't the God of my childhood or of the tattered Bibles that circulated in the prison. It was a silent conversion, a personal reckoning inside the cell. I began to see that the cell wasn't just a punishment. It was a mirror. It had silenced me, but the silence had forced me to hear the truth. The truth was that as long as I blamed Richard and Laura for my pain, I was giving them power over me. My freedom would not begin with the opening of a gate, but with the unlocking of the prison of my own hatred. When they finally released me from solitary, the other women noticed a change. The anger in my eyes had been replaced by a calm that unsettled them. I hadn't found God. I had found myself. And I realized that real freedom isn't getting out. It's being able to forgive yourself for loving too much, for trusting too much, for being human. The fight for justice would continue, but now it would come from a place of strength, not of pain. The following years were marked by this new, internal calm. I became a veteran, a lifer that the new girls sought out for advice. I taught them how to navigate the dangerous currents of prison life, how to find small pockets of dignity amidst the degradation. I was the mentor Maria had been for me. And it was during these years that Maria began to fade. The cough that had plagued her for years worsened, and her once strong body grew frail. The prison infirmary offered little more than aspirin and indifference. It was I who cared for her, moistening her lips, reading to her from the library, ensuring the other women left her in peace. It was a role reversal, a chance to repay the debt of survival I owed her. In her last weeks, Maria spoke more than she had in all the years I'd known her. She told me her story, a dark tapestry of poverty, abuse, and bad choices. She was the daughter of an addict and the granddaughter of a thief. Crime was her inheritance, a family legacy passed down through generations. I was born between keys and echoes, she said one night, her voice a faint whisper. Prison wasn't a punishment. It was the continuation of my family's inheritance. Hearing her story expanded my world. My tragedy, which had once felt like the center of the universe, became one story among many. I saw that most of the women here were not monsters. They were mirrors of universal pains, products of broken systems and traumas that had shaped them. Understanding this didn't lessen the injustice of what happened to me, but it connected me to them, turning my pity into a deep, aching empathy. Maria died on a spring morning, quietly, as I held her hand. Her death left a void in the cell and in my heart. She had taught me how to survive physically. But her final lesson was spiritual, that even in a hopeless place we can create meaning through connection. After she died, I took on her role unofficially. I became the prison family for the younger, lost women. I listened to them, protected them, and shared the wisdom Maria had given me. I was still Eleanor Vance, prisoner number 734, convicted of a crime I didn't commit. But I was also something else, a witness to the untold stories of those walls, a keeper of the silent griefs. Maria's death solidified my transformation. I was no longer just doing time. I was living a purpose, forged in the fire of loss and compassion. And somehow, that was a kind of freedom that neither Richard nor Laura could ever touch. 15 years. A lifetime lived in the slow, methodical rhythm of the prison. The hope for justice had become a low, nearly extinguished ember, a dream stored in a dusty corner of my mind. I had accepted my fate. My focus was the day-to-day, the small victories, helping a woman write a letter to her son, seeing the light in another's eyes as she read her first complete sentence, protecting a newcomer from the wrong kind of attention. Then, the routine was broken by the arrival of a new group of transfers. Among them was a young woman named Maya, her eyes filled with the same terror I felt on my first day. She was assigned to Maria's old bunk, and I took her under my wing, seeing in her an echo of the frightened girl I used to be. Maya was a listener. During the long nights, when the murmurs and muffled sobs filled the air, I would share pieces of my story. Not the details of the crime, but the feelings of loss and betrayal. She, in turn, spoke of her life, of her mistakes. She came from the same city where Richard and Laura had moved. One night, talking about the rich and powerful people there, she mentioned a rumor she'd heard on the street. A story about the iron lawyer, Laura Jensen, Laura's maiden name, which she had resumed professionally. The rumor was about an old case, a hushed-up scandal involving a wealthy client, a husband conveniently removed, and a rare piece of art that mysteriously vanished after the trial. Maya told the story as gossip, unaware she was describing the architecture of my destroyed life. My blood ran cold. What piece of art? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I don't know, Maya said. Something about a Dutch painter. Van something. My heart stopped. The centerpiece of the prosecution's case against me was the disappearance of a Van Huysum painting from Richard's studio, which they claimed I sold on the black market to pay off gambling debts they invented. The painting was never found. It was the missing piece, the black hole at the center of the case. Where did you hear this, Maya? She shrugged. From a guy I used to date. He worked security at an art collector's house. Said his boss bought the painting in a private deal from Laura Jensen right after she won a big-shot murder case years ago. For the first time in 15 years, the ember of hope didn't just glow, it burst into flame. It wasn't just a rumor. It was a thread. A thread that, if pulled, could unravel the entire tapestry of lies. The truth wasn't dead. It was just hidden, waiting for someone to find it. And that someone was going to be me. Maya's revelation was like a flash of lightning in a 2-decade-long darkness. But hope, inside a prison, is a dangerous commodity. It makes you vulnerable. I knew the information was my only weapon, but the prison is designed to disarm. Every letter I wrote was read by a censor, every phone call recorded. If I mentioned Laura Jensen's name, the Van Huysum painting, or the collector's rumor, the alarm would sound. Laura was powerful. She would have contacts, informants. The door to the truth would slam shut before I could even try to open it. I needed a channel, a way to smuggle the most valuable information of my life out of those walls. My mind, trained to find patterns and hidden meanings in art, went to work. The solution wasn't in force, but in subtlety. It was in the language that was uniquely mine, art history. I spent the next several nights in the library, not reading for pleasure, but for strategy. I pored over art books, my heart pounding, searching for the perfect cipher. I found it in a book on the Dutch Golden Age. I began to write a letter to my sister, Chloe. On its surface, it was a letter from a resigned prisoner, full of melancholic reflections on time and loss, a request that she sell some of my old art books to help with her expenses. But woven into the prose was a coded message. I described a specific Van Hysum painting, lamenting how its symbolism of transient beauty and hidden decay reflected my life. I inserted the name of the art collector Maya had mentioned as a noted expert on the period. I asked Chloe to look for a buyer named Jensen, a name I described as being common among patrons with a taste for discreet acquisitions of questionable provenance. Sending the letter was an act of blind faith. I handed it to the guard, my face a mask of indifference, while inside my spirit was screaming. The weeks that followed were the longest of waits. Each day without a reply was a torture. Doubt gnawed at me. Would Chloe understand? Or would she dismiss it as the ramblings of a sister she barely knew anymore? A woman driven mad by confinement? I had played my one and only card. I had entrusted the fragile thread of my hope to the outside world, a world that had forgotten me. I continued my routine, teaching, reading, caring for the other women, but beneath the surface, I was holding my breath. Prison had taught me patience, but this was a new form of agony. I was no longer waiting for time to pass. I was waiting for life to begin again. And it all depended on whether or not Chloe could see the truth hidden in the painting. Chloe received the letter on a rainy autumn day. She told me later that at first she read it with a sad sigh. To her, it was just another reminder of her older sister's tragedy, the intellectual trapped in her artistic metaphors, unable to speak plainly. She was about to put the letter away when one phrase stopped her. I had referred to the Van Hysum painting as having been stolen twice, once by greed and once by the family's complicit silence. That word, family, was our cipher. It was a reference to a promise we made as teenagers after a bad fight with our parents, to never let family silence cover up an injustice. It was the key I prayed she would find. The specific mention of the collector and the name Jensen, connected to that cipher, ignited a spark of doubt in her mind. And with doubt came guilt. For nearly 20 years, Chloe had accepted the official narrative. It was easier. Visiting me was painful. Believing in my innocence was complicated. She had built her life on the foundation of my absence. But the letter, with its desperate code, forced her to confront the truth of her own abandonment. I abandoned her to save myself from the weight of her tragedy, she confessed to herself. And that is why now I would save her. Guilt turned into action. She didn't sell my books. Instead, she used her savings to hire a private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop with tired eyes but a reputation for tenacity. She gave him the letter, explaining the code, the collector's name, and its connection to Laura Jensen. The investigator listened with skepticism, accustomed to the desperate hopes of convicts' families. Chloe's decision was a plot twist I could never have anticipated. She, the sister who lived in the world of the superficial, became my sole champion in the world of reality. The investigator started digging, and slowly, the first shovelful of dirt revealed something hard beneath. He discovered that the art collector was, indeed, an acquaintance of Laura's. He confirmed that the Van Hysum painting, never registered as recovered, was in his private collection. The purchase had been made through a shell company, a murky transaction that reeked of money laundering. It wasn't conclusive proof, but it was more than smoke. It was the smell of fire. Chloe wrote me back, a short, cautious letter, devoid of details, but filled with a new tone. "I'm taking care of your books, Ellie," she wrote. "I think they're worth more than we thought." And I knew. The thread I had cast into the darkness had been caught. Someone finally was pulling. The investigation by Chloe and her private detective opened the first fissure in the wall of lies that surrounded me. With the evidence they gathered, they approached the Innocence Project, a non-profit organization dedicated to exonerating the wrongfully convicted. They were skeptical at first, overwhelmed with thousands of cases. But the peculiarity of mine, the defense attorney, the missing painting, the code in the letter, caught the attention of a young, ambitious lawyer named Anya. She saw the pattern no one else wanted to see. The organization took my case. For the first time in 20 years, I had a legal team that believed in me. The news spread slowly through the prison, first as a whisper, then as a roar. Suddenly, I was no longer just Eleanor, the librarian. I became a symbol. For many women, I was a beacon of hope, living proof that the system could sometimes be corrected. They brought me small gifts, a little extra coffee, an extra bar of soap. They offered me words of encouragement, their eyes shining with a faith I could barely sustain for myself. But for others, my new prominence was a threat. The attention I received from lawyers and the media that was beginning to sniff around the story upset the prison's balance of power. Some of the more hardened women viewed me with suspicion and resentment. "Think you're better than us?" One of them spat at me in the yard. "Think just 'cause you know big words your hands are clean?" Violence here was mute. Only blood spoke. I had to navigate this new, dangerous landscape, where a wrong look or a misplaced word could lead to a makeshift blade in the shadows. The pressure was immense. I lived in a state of constant alert, from both the rising hope and the imminent danger. Anya, my new lawyer, was a force of nature. She filed motions, unearthed old files, found witnesses the original prosecution had ignored. Laura's castle of cards began to tremble. The art collector, facing charges of possessing stolen property, agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Every small legal victory was a shockwave that rippled through the prison. I felt like I was living in two worlds: the brutal, unchanging world of my cell and the outside world, where a fierce legal battle was being waged in my name. I was both the prize and the battlefield. Only later did I realize, the real trial, the one that would define not just my freedom but my soul, had not yet begun. The news of my case being reopened hit Richard and Laura like an earthquake. The perfect world they had built on my sacrifice began to crumble. The media, once so quick to condemn me, now reveled in the story of possible injustice and betrayal. Laura's name, once synonymous with success, was now linked to scandal. Richard, true to his nature, was the first to crack. In a desperate attempt to save himself, he went to the prosecution, offering to testify against Laura in exchange for a deal. He painted her as the mastermind, the seductress who had manipulated him. It was his final cowardice, a betrayal upon a betrayal. Laura, however, did not go quietly. She fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, using every legal trick, every political connection she had to obstruct, delay, and intimidate. In the midst of this legal firestorm, I was called for a parole hearing, a cruel formality as my case was still under review. I sat in a sterile room, facing a panel of impassive faces. They were not interested in the new evidence. They were interested in one thing: remorse. The prosecutor asked me the question they always ask: "Ms. Vance, after 20 years, are you ready to admit your guilt and express remorse for the murder of your husband?" The silence in the room was heavy. My heart pounded. I could have played the game. I could have offered a false confession, a staged repentance to appease the system. But I looked at those faces and saw the machinery of injustice in full operation. And I knew I could no longer be a cog in it. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I will not feel remorse for a crime I did not commit. But I do feel remorse," I continued, looking directly at the prosecutor. "I feel remorse for loving a man who did not deserve my loyalty. I feel remorse for trusting a system that values a confession over the truth. I feel remorse for every day I spent hating my betrayers, because that hatred imprisoned me more than these walls ever could. I have served my time, not just in years but in my soul. I have learned about forgiveness, not for them, but for myself. And that is the truth I offer. If it is not enough to set me free, then so be it. But I will no longer participate in the lie. My parole was denied. But when I walked back to my cell, I did not feel defeated. For the first time, I felt truly free. I had reclaimed my voice. I had reclaimed my truth. And that was something no one, not even the justice system, could ever take from me again. The parole denial was a blessing in disguise. My statement, recorded and reported by the media, shifted the tide of public opinion. The story was no longer about a murderer. It was about a woman fighting for her truth. The pressure on the prosecutor's office became unbearable. Faced with the evidence of the painting and the looming testimony of the collector and Richard, they had no choice. They offered a deal. If I would not sue the state for wrongful conviction, they would vacate my original verdict. My conviction was officially overturned. After 7,305 days, I was a free woman. The words sounded strange, foreign on my tongue. The exit was not dramatic. There were no apologies, just paperwork. A guard I had known for a decade walked me to the final gate. "Take care of yourself, Eleanor," she said, her voice holding an uncharacteristic sliver of warmth. The steel gate rolled aside with a loud groan, revealing a world I had only seen in photographs and on television. The morning air was cool and smelled of wet grass and car exhaust, the smells of freedom. The world seemed impossibly loud, the colors too vibrant, the open space too vast. It was overwhelming. And there she was, leaning against a car, older, with strands of silver in her hair, but her eyes were the same. Chloe. We ran to each other. And the hug was a collision of 20 years of pain, guilt, and unspoken love. We wept, not for sadness, but for the sheer weight of that moment. "It's over, Ellie," she whispered into my hair. "It's over." But I knew it wasn't. Prison is not a place you just leave behind. It becomes a part of you, a ghost town in your soul. Today, the keys don't frighten me anymore. I'm afraid of locking my heart again. The world saw me fall. Only God and the women I left behind saw me rise. Sometimes, people ask me if I've forgiven Richard and Laura. The truth is, I rarely think of them. To forgive them would imply they still occupy a space in my life. My journey wasn't about them. It was about me. Out here, I've learned that freedom isn't getting out. It's being able to forgive yourself. Sometimes, God doesn't open the cell, He changes who we are inside it. If you have ever felt trapped by something you didn't do, chained by a betrayal, or lost in the silence of a pain no one else can see, then this story is yours too. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that even in the longest of nights, the truth, like the sun, always finds a way to rise. In the end, I realized that not every prison has bars, and not every kind of freedom means being outside. For years, I believed justice lived in courtrooms. But I've learned it's born in the quiet corners of the heart, when we choose not to be consumed by hatred. Pain taught me what no book ever could, that truth doesn't need to be believed to be real, and that there's dignity even in being forgotten. Today I understand that the meaning of life isn't to win, but to remain whole, even when everything falls apart. Faith didn't open my cell door, but it helped me see beauty in the small lights, in the sound of morning, the smell of old paper, the memory of my child. And maybe that's what freedom truly is. Not escaping the darkness, but learning to walk through it without losing your soul. If this story made you reflect, share it with someone who also carries invisible scars. Write in the comments, what does freedom mean to you? Your words might light the way for someone else. And if you want to keep hearing stories of pain, faith, and new beginnings, subscribe to the channel and walk with me into the next chapter.